Okay, so I've given the collar a press, and you can see that that rolled the edge there. Uh, the edge of the collar has rolled under nicely with the bigger seam allowance that we used, and also the understitch. So what we're doing now is we're going to sew the collar onto the neckline of the garment. And what we have to do with this, just make sure that you're sewing the right side, so with the right edge to the right edge. So this is going to be the top collar. So when that's finished and on the garment, that'll be the top collar sitting against the outside of the fabric. So when we stitch this together, we have to make sure that we stitch with the wrong side, or the under collar, on the outside of the garment. We have notches here. We have a notch to indicate where the collar starts. We have our shoulder notch that we've talked about before. We have a centre back notch and centre back notch on the neckline. So we're just matching those notches up. And this is a little bit tricky, but it does help if you have the top collar on the top side. And what also happens too is, because this is curved, the neckline sometimes stretches a little bit where it goes onto the bias. So just to work your way around, and what we're having to do is match up the collar with the seam allowance here. You can see I pressed the shoulder seam allowance open as well. And just make sure, as you're doing this, make sure that you haven't got anything bunched up underneath. So what I usually do is just sew to the collar, and then I can just check to see whether there are any like pleats or gathers under there. So matching up the back here, and if you find that you've sewn from one point to the next and it hasn't matched, just actually stop, unpick it, and go back and do it again. Otherwise, you'll just keep if you're out, at the shoulder notch, you'll be out more at the center back, and then out more at the next shoulder notch. So just do it step by step, and if it's not working, unpick it and try again. Otherwise, you'll just end up with this, this end of the collar not matching on the neckline. Okay, so I've got my collar attached, and just checking that all the way around. That looks like a pleat, but it was just a crease. So that's all good around there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to secure the neck, the lining onto the neck. And I'm going to start sewing, even though we want the neck attached all the way down, I'm actually going to start sewing where the collar starts. I'm going to leave that open. So I just think that's the thing to do when we get around to sewing the center front. And again, got the front there. And what I did, actually, the shoulder seam on the jacket, I pressed that shoulder seam towards the back too, because of the bulk of this little bit here, it seemed to want to sit back rather than forcing it open, for an open seam. And match up. You can, if you want, you can put pins in, but I think it's a good thing to get into the swing of trying to use your fingers to manipulate the fabric rather than having pins in everything. Because I always think if you've got pins that you're going to sew over the pins and then break the pins or break the needle or something like that. The curve around the back neck, it's on the bias, so it does tend to stretch a little bit, so be careful of that. So like with any sewing, it takes time to get something done neatly, so don't rush. And I'll just sew it there.